Sources tell CBS News President Biden is considering using sweeping executive authority to curb immigration at the southern border. It comes after Republicans in Congress blocked a compromise immigration deal earlier this month.
Our Nancy Cordes is tracking that story, and she's joining us now. Nancy, good to see you. The executive action would be the same one that was invoked by former President Trump to ban entry for some visitors from Muslim countries. And it seems significant that it's now being, applied by a Democratic administration. And there was a lot of legal pushback when the president tried to implement, former president tried to implement the ban.
There was, and he ultimately had to abandon that policy. But now the Biden administration is giving this law 212F another look. They haven't made a firm decision yet. We're told that a decision could come in the next couple of weeks. But essentially, what this move would do would be to restrict access to the overloaded asylum program, and in doing so, discourage some migrants from traveling to the United States and crossing the border. Why is the president doing this, given the fact that it's an unusual move, certainly for a Democratic administration, didn't go so well for the Trump administration the last time? Well, we've seen an incredible record-breaking surge of migrants coming across the border over the past few years, 2.4 million migrants just in the past fiscal year. And the president has gotten an earful from Democratic governors and mayors who say that their cities have been inundated by an influx of new migrants being bused, sometimes flown to their cities from southern states, from Texas in particular. And this is an issue that the president is certainly sensitive about politically, given that he doesn't poll that well on border security, and it is an election year.
It certainly is. And speaking of that, part of the reason you're in L.A. is because President Biden's on the campaign trail. You're out there with him. Last night, he was at a fundraiser, and he spoke about Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and he used sort of colorful language in a very Biden-esque way. What did he say about Putin, and have we heard any reaction from the Kremlin?
One thing we know about President Biden is that he does use that colorful language. He is pretty unfiltered when he gets to these closed-door fundraisers where there aren't any cameras on him. And certainly that was the case at a fundraiser in San Francisco last night. He called Vladimir Putin a crazy SOB. Which is a term we haven't heard him use before exactly when it comes to Vladimir Putin, but certainly he has hit Putin hard before. He's called him a murderous dictator. He's called him a thug. So it wasn't entirely out of character for him, and it really comes as he's trying to make it as clear as possible to his supporters and the general public all the daylight that exists between himself and his Republican rival, his predecessor, Donald Trump, when it comes to Vladimir Putin. And he has been criticizing Trump on practically a daily basis at this point for failing to condemn Vladimir Putin for the death last week of the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny.
Mm-hmm. So I want to switch gears a little. So there's another poll out, taking a look at a possible matchup between Biden and Donald Trump. It comes from Marquette University, and it shows Trump with a bit of an edge over President Biden in a presidential race. Now, I'm kind of sighing a little bit here because, I mean, as a member of the media, perhaps we should have learned something about polling during, not the last election, but the election before. We're a ways out. There are a lot of factors that will influence the way people feel about both men. President Trump has, all these court battles that he's dealing with. President Biden, former President Trump, President Biden has a lot of international pressures that he's dealing with. How are we to interpret this poll?
So I'll tell you how the Biden team wants people to interpret this poll and other polls like it that have all showed that Donald Trump is leading the current president, President Biden. Certainly, there are some polls that show it the other way around, but we've seen a lot of polls that look a lot like this Marquette poll, particularly in battleground states. And what Biden campaign officials tell us over and over again is that they feel that their voters, their supporters, aren't really locked in yet. They aren't paying a lot of attention to this race. He is running essentially uncontested in the Democratic primary. Those voters are living their lives and not dialed in to a presidential race that is still some 9 months away. They argue that as we get closer to Election Day in November, their voters will wake up to the fact that it's an election year, will get more dialed in, and then those polls will start to change. Are they right? Well, we'll have a lot of polling between now and November
No doubt.
that we'll be able to look at to see if that theory of the case is correct.
So true, Nancy. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.